When it comes to identity and culture, words are not a definition with an exact meaning. They are more like an expression attempting to encapsulate a depth of human experience that could never be adequately put into words. So, if an autistic person has autism, then what's the issue and why do we care? Hi everyone, Paul Mikulev here from Aspergers from the Inside. Ever since discovering my own autism and starting to get involved with public advocacy, I'm often asked what language people should use when talking about autism. Should I say autistic person, or person with autism, or something else entirely? It sounds like a simple enough question, and there's no doubt that language is important, but this issue has far-reaching implications that you may not fully realize. In this video, we're going to go beyond the superficial arguments to get to the heart of this issue and explore how it affects the autism community and what you can do to help. So if you're asking, what should I do? What language should I use? The quickest, simplest answer is that when it comes to autism, you're safest to use identity-first language, saying autistic person unless otherwise specified. There may be some exceptions, but this is your best first guess, at least in most situations in my culture. I offer a much more comprehensive approach later in the video. Okay, so let's put this question into perspective. Language matters, you want to be respectful, and we know that some people can get really passionate about the right way and the wrong way to talk about autism. So to set the scene, let's start with a quick question. Are you a parent? There's a high chance you may be. Parents make up a substantial percentage of the population. Now, a slightly different question. Do you have children? And if so, do you also identify as a parent? Now, let me ask you, which is correct? Which do you prefer? Is it better that I refer to someone as a parent or as a person with children? If you're feeling as if these two phrases mean essentially the same thing, you would be correct. Of course they do. Both are grammatically correct, both communicate more or less the same thing, just with a slightly different emphasis. So if an autistic person has autism, then what's the issue and why do we care? As it turns out, people do care, and the verdict within the autism community is not universal, which means that in answer to the question of which one should I use, there is unfortunately no unanimous consensus, which is perhaps not surprising since we are, after all, an incredibly diverse group of people. So how can we understand this? Well, there may be no consensus, but there are very strong trends. For example, in general, parents typically prefer to say their children have autism, while adults typically prefer to say they are autistic. There are also many people who use both interchangeably and couldn't care less. From a parenting perspective, using person-first language is about being inclusive and accepting. Each child's journey is unique and should not be defined or limited by a label. This is also the most common version that professionals are taught to use during their training. For adults, reclaiming the word autistic and owning autism as an identity is about self-acceptance, recognizing it's a core part of who they are as a person. Interestingly, I've noticed that children, even children who enthusiastically embrace their autism, tend to be more comfortable saying that they have autism. Rather than identifying solely as autistic, they're more likely to say something like, yes, I have autism and I love it, but it doesn't define me, it's just a part of me. There are also other preferences too. Some people prefer to say they are on the autism spectrum or just on the spectrum. Others identify as autists. When it comes to identity and culture, words are not a definition with an exact meaning. They are more like an expression attempting to encapsulate a depth of human experience that could never be adequately put into words. So why so much disagreement? Where does it all come from? We can understand this by looking at language as a reaction. Let's start with the oldest view, the parent or professional with a person-first preference. Language emphasizing the person is a reaction to labeling human beings as disabled. In their language guide, People with Disability Australia explain that the use of person-first language is to avoid unnecessary focus on a person's impairment. The dehumanization of people with disability has a long history, so we choose to preface our language with a reminder of personhood. This language implies that our condition is a negative thing that should be seen as separate from the person. The autistic adult wants their difference to be recognized and celebrated. We therefore react against person-first language by putting our emphasis on identity instead. Autism is an integral part of me, not something I can separate or distance myself from. It's a reaction against the still far too common idea that you can love the child but hate the autism. You can't. Autism is how my brain is wired. It affects every aspect of who I am, my personality, my preferences, how I think, how I see the world. If you cannot accept autism, if you cannot embrace autism, you cannot accept, embrace, or include me. Identity-first language, coupled with a sense of autistic pride, is a reaction against a lifetime of being helped to conform, to be less autistic, or at least less obviously, observably autistic. Is it any wonder that many of us have been masking for decades, fostering crippling self-esteem, self-doubt, and a deep sense of shame and rejection? Not fun. Instead, the alternative of autistic pride is starting to look quite attractive. For children, however, it's often a different story. For those lucky enough to embrace autism at an early age, there's no need to rebel, no need to cling so tightly to the autistic identity. Instead, many children want to be seen as a whole person, not someone who is always seen through an autistic lens. Then there are those of us who couldn't care less either way. I personally refer to myself as autistic most of the time, but only when it feels right. Sometimes saying I have autism fits more neatly into a sentence. I'm not going to waste my time and energy on rules for the sake of rules. I'd rather communicate explicitly that autism is an integral part of me. I'd rather be direct about consciously embracing my differences, valuing diversity, deliberately taking measures to include people so that everyone has a chance to connect and participate. If you need language to remind yourself that I'm a person, there's a problem, and one that adhering to a particular language structure is not going to fix. So how can you make sure you're using the best language? Well, firstly, if you're referring to yourself, your own family, your own community, express yourself in whatever way makes you feel most comfortable. It's when we're coming in from the outside that we need to take steps to make sure we're respectful. And with that in mind, here's my simple rule to get it right. Number 1, pause. Take a deep breath, don't stress, it's okay, if you get it wrong, it's not the end of the world. You're okay, everything is okay. Number 2, if you're feeling nervous, awkward, or unsure, then ask. Do you say autistic or on the spectrum? I'm not sure what you prefer. Listen to how the person refers to themselves and just copy that. Finally, in situations where there's no opportunity to ask, use the word autistic, identity-first language, unless otherwise informed. This matches current best practice adopted by many governments and large organizations. So stress less. If you're actively asking and listening, then you'll pick it up soon enough. And even if you accidentally say the wrong thing, it's not disrespectful. We know it can be challenging learning the nuances of talking about a new topic, but if you're open, humble, and willing to learn, the people around you will tell you what you need to know. So how do leading organizations handle this challenging landscape? It may sound complicated, but the answer is quite simple. Acknowledge the diversity and stop insisting on black and white, right and wrong. Here's a good summary from People with Disabilities Australia. Person-first language, people with disability, and identity-first language, disabled people, are both used in Australia. People with disability often have strong preferences for one term or the other, so it is best to follow the lead of the person or group you are talking about. Or this from the Autism Cooperative Research Centre, a national government-funded organisation. The term autistic person uses identity-first language, which reflects the belief that being autistic is a core part of a person's identity. The Autism CRC follows the lead of autistic individuals working within and with its national collaborative network, the majority of whom have indicated a preference for identity-first language over person-first language. They also note that using this language is consistent with the preferred position of the Australian Autism Alliance, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, the National Autistic Society in the UK, and the Autism Journal, the major international peer-reviewed journal on autism. And finally, perhaps the most PC example you can get, clearly written by lawyers and politicians, the opening statement to the public hearings of the recent Australian Senate inquiry into autism. The committee recognises that people use many terms when talking about autism. The committee respects that language is an individual and highly personal choice. In the context of this inquiry, the committee will be using identity-first language. The reason I'm sharing so many examples is to give you a sense of how well accepted this approach is among large organisations that take political correctness and their public image seriously. Yet, despite this overwhelming consensus on best practice, people are learning every day to focus on the person, not the disability. Well-meaning educators pass the belief onto healthcare professionals who transfer it onto unsuspecting parents brand new to their autism journey. So next time you hear someone correct you on your language, point them to some of these examples of current industry best practice, or at the very least, share that it's not so black and white and that a variety of views exist within the autism community. In summary, to say that you shouldn't use identity-first language is to imply that it's somehow offensive or disrespectful. And if it's offensive to call someone autistic, you're saying that to be autistic is an insult, right? So this is precisely the notion that actually autistic advocates are trying to reverse by embracing the concept of autistic pride and calling not only for autism awareness, but also acceptance and appreciation. Let's move beyond the binary black and white of right and wrong and use language intentionally to mean what we want it to mean. Let's state explicitly that my autism is an integral part of me that needs to be accepted, validated, and even celebrated. Let's state explicitly that autistic people are more than just their diagnosis, and that that lens should not be used as a barrier to seeing the whole person. As to which language is the best to use, I personally look forward to a day where the autistic community does not have to rebel, and that language can be used as interchangeably as saying that someone is a parent or saying that someone has children. Insisting that there is one and only one correct version only ensures continued division, perpetuating the problem that we are all trying to solve. To move past this issue, let's follow the lead of major autism organisations, including notable international autistic-led organisations such as the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, by recognising the importance of language as an expression of identity, and not seeking to limit that expression with politically correct, ultimately dehumanizing rules about what you can and cannot say. If you take anything away from this video, let it be this. If you want to know how to talk respectfully to a person, don't ask a rulebook on the internet, ask the person. Surely that is the most truly person-first approach we have.